This is an ABC podcast.
At different times in our history, Australians have been pretty heavy drinkers, at least of some beverages. Remember when wine overtook beer as our preferred tipple? What a reassessment of national character that involved. Who even are we now? Well, today on Life Matters, we're going to reassess some of our assumptions around our drinking, because Australians, it seems, are opting for new ways to socialise and some interesting new drinks. I'm Hilary Harper. You're on Radio National. You might have spotted some new products in your local bottle shops lately with a key difference. They're non-alcoholic. Our fastest growing drinks category is non-alcoholic wine. It was a $4.5 million industry last year, but it's growing so quickly it could be worth $15 million by the end of this year. Australia's first non-alcoholic gin bar has opened up in Melbourne, but this isn't just a niche trend. It's reflected at outlets across Australia too. If you've cut back on your drinking in recent years or switched to non-alcoholic versions of your favourite drinks, how has that worked for you? Have those non-alcoholic and low-alcoholic options made it easier? And how did others react to your not drinking? Faye Lawrence founded the non-drinking social group Untoxicated in 2018. Faye, welcome to Life Matters.
Hi, Hilary. Thank you for having me on the show.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Tell us how you made the decision to stop drinking and how hard it was to understand that you had a problem at the time.
Well, I've been quite a high-functioning drinker for a long, long time, probably about 30 years. And I really, towards the end, I think being high-functioning, it's very easy to keep yourself in denial because you have this kind of all-or-nothing thinking that you're either, a normal drinker or a rock-bottom alcoholic. And there's lots of people that are in that in-between phase. But by the end for me, I had essentially lost control of my drinking and, there was no fun in it for me anymore. It wasn't doing what I wanted it to do. And I knew when I picked up a drink, anything could happen essentially. So that was when it was time to pull the pin. Yeah.
And then how was it for you when it came to weekends and socialising after you made that decision?
Yeah, really, really difficult. I think because it was so intrinsically linked with my social identity and who I perceived myself to be, and strongly in my family. And I've been in Australia for over 20 years now, but both in Australia and the UK, there's very much this perception. Sobriety has a really bad image problem, and so there's this perception that people who don't drink are boring, they're not trustworthy, they're not to be trusted, and you kind of want to steer clear from them. They're not the type of people that you'd want to have as friends. And so when I shifted to becoming a non-drinker myself, that was it was like learning to walk again. It was like learning to walk because I was like, well, who am I now? I'd always been a big party girl, and it was very much everything I did involved alcohol, particularly socially. So I really had to kind of reinvent myself. And that's why I started Untoxicated, because I thought there must be other people like me out there that still want to have a good time socially just without alcohol. And
it turns out there were many, weren't there? You've opened a chapter in Sydney now, not just in Brisbane, and it sounds like it's something that's happening around the country. But Faye, what are some of the other reasons that people tell you why they've decided to avoid alcohol?
There's actually lots of reasons. It's been quite surprising to me on this journey. So there's very surprisingly to me, some people just don't like drinking, but there's lots of reasons. Some people can kind of notice that they're not that they don't like the impact, for example. So if their parents, they don't like the fact they're waking up with a hangover and they're cranky with the kids, or they're not present for the children. There's people for health and fitness reasons or weight reasons. There's people who are starting to recognise that maybe they've got a little bit of a problem and they're trying to cut back a bit. There's just so many reasons. If people are pregnant or women are pregnant. There's a lot of reasons, and there's this whole new movement around the sober curious side of things, which is for people who are taking a sense of curiosity around their drinking and becoming more mindful about it without having that all or nothing approach. So it's good to see.
It's really interesting though, isn't it, Faye, that so many of the non-alcoholic drinks are modelled on alcoholic drinks. You know, they've got the similar bottles and labels, and they're really marketed as the kind of alcoholic drink that you still have in the same situations, but just minus the alcohol. What do you think is the effect of that?
I think because socially people very much feel under the microscope if they're not drinking. So when you go out with your friends, you want to be part of the occasion, even if you're not drinking. So if you've got a non-alcoholic champagne or a non-alcoholic, glass of wine or a cocktail, whatever it might be, excuse me, you can still feel part of that. I think there's also a reward component. People who, for whatever reason, are choosing not to drink still want to have something that's like a nice, sophisticated, treat that's not, or celebratory, that's not a post-mix, Diet Coke, for example. And I think because, ultimately we're social animals and we want to belong. So I think the scrutiny that people receive when they're not drinking and then people ask them, why is that? And they kind of feel under the microscope and grilled. It takes that away. People kind of don't notice if you're having a non-alcoholic drink. And it can otherwise make people feel quite uncomfortable if you're the only one not drinking.
Must be hard though if you're trying to avoid alcohol because you want to move away from the world of alcohol.
Yeah, big time. Yeah.
Indeed.
So I think for people, non-alcoholic replacements or drinks are really, really useful for a lot of people in the same way. For some people, it's really helpful in cutting back. So, for example, like using nicotine replacements when you're trying to give up smoking. But I think for some people, they are triggering also. I think in this discussion that does need to be part of it because people who are problematic drinkers, it can be a bit triggering.
Yeah, for sure. And Faye, it's been fascinating to hear about things from both sides of the coin. You feel judged for not drinking and some people feel judged for drinking too much. There's just so much focus on our drinking in Australia, isn't there?
Yes, that's absolutely it. So it's kind of like you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't, because either you're not drinking or you're drinking too much, you're going to receive pressure from people and you're going to receive judgment. And so what happens then is people either stay home and become socially isolated, and the research bears this up, or they then acquiesce to the pressure. And so one way or the other, whichever side that you're of the fence you're sitting on, that the outcome's not great. So I think it's good to see these rise in non-alcoholic drinks because it gives people other options, it gives people choice without feeling left out.
Indeed. Faye, thanks so much for your time today. It's been really, really interesting to chat to you.
Thank you so much, Hilary. See you.
Faye Lawrence, founder of non-drinking social group Untoxicated. They've got chapters in Brisbane and Sydney now, and there are other groups around too that you can find online in your local area. You're listening to Life Matters, and we're talking today about this move that some people are part of towards non-alcoholic or low-alcoholic drinks. Is that something that you have been experimenting with, and how's it gone for you? Professor Steve Allsop is with us too. He's from the National Drug Research Institute at Curtin University. Steve, welcome to the program.
Good morning, Hilary.
Now, what do we know about the sobriety movement in Australia? How much has sober curiosity taken off in the last few years, and why?
Well, let's start with what's happened, and I promise these will be the only figures I'll throw. We've seen, firstly, an increase in the age at which people first start drinking. So over a 20-year period, it's gone from just under 15 years old to just over 16 years old. And that's a good thing because we know young people are particularly vulnerable to the effects of alcohol. But we've also seen, even amongst those over the age of 18, we've seen a significant decrease in the number of them who are drinking, or put it the other way around, an increase in the number of them who don't drink at all. So 14 to 17-year-olds, it used to be 12 years ago, it's just under 40% didn't drink at all in the previous 12 months. That's gone up to 73%. But in the 18 to 24-year-olds, it's gone from 13% to just over 20%. So there's an increase in the number of people who don't drink at all or start drinking at a later age. So from a public health perspective, that's good. We shouldn't take too much comfort in that, because there are some people who remain a bit intransigent. Those over 50 years old seem to be carrying on pretty much as before, and also there's still a significant number of people, at least once a month, in the 18 to 24-year-old group. 40% of them will drink over the single occasion low risk limits. What that is they'll drink 5 or more drinks at least once a month, and we know that's is related to an increase in risk. Obviously, the more you drink, the greater the risk.
Yeah, I was a bit startled to read that the average daily consumption is still about 2 glasses of wine or a large bottle of beer or 2 shots of spirits, even though the national guidelines say it's no more than 10 standard drinks a week. So we've still got a way to go, haven't we?
And I think we do, and I think we're catching up, I think, with that. But obviously there are some changes going on. But I think Faye nailed it when she said a lot of people think of it as all or nothing. They think, well, I'm not alcohol dependent, I'm not an alcoholic, so I'm okay. But we know that risk starts for some people from the first drink. That there's a small increase in there's an increase in risk from a low level of, for example, a number of cancers. Obviously, again, the more you drink, the greater the risk. But we have seen some welcome changes. So we still need to be concerned about the significant burden of disease that exists and injuries that exist. Go into any ED, emergency department it used to be on a Friday night. Now it's Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday night. And you'll see the significant harm that arises from the acute effects of alcohol from people being overly intoxicated.
We're speaking with Professor Steve Allsop from the National Drug Research Institute at Curtin University. And Steve, I want to whip through a few possible influencing factors and tell me whether or not they're actually having an effect. Things like dry July and sober October, do they help shift people's drinking patterns in the long term?
In the long term, we're not so sure. But I think what it's a part of the problem here is trying to figure out what's going on. It's a bit like research soup. We know there's lots of ingredients probably having an effect, but it's hard to pull out the main one. But certainly, I think dry July. People are getting a little bit more practice at saying, no, sorry, I'm not drinking just now. There is some concern that at the end of dry July, there might be a little bit of a over-celebration. But I think it's part of the alerting people to the value of taking time out or thinking about your drinking.
What about the drink driving advertising that's been quite prominent over recent decades? Has that had an effect?
Well, I think the drink driving advertising is an element, but the key element is the biggest influence is the likelihood that you will be detected. So we have very good evidence that this has been a fantastic public health strategy where having highly visible, highly likely, if you get the impression that if you drink too much, you're going to get stopped. And look, the measure of that is when I was 18, it would be Steve can drive, he's too drunk to sing. Now we see lots of people, young people, who the idea of drinking and driving is just alien to them. Coupled with that, we've improved access to transport. It used to be a time where you try not to drink and drive, but you couldn't get a transport home. So that combination of if you drink and drive, you're going to get caught, and we've got better options for getting people home. Probably not so much so in the regional areas. That's had a big impact on people's drinking. Right. And we also saw, as a consequence of drink driving legislation, an increase in the availability of higher quality, lower alcohol products.
Yes, I love the idea of Steve's too drunk to sing being a metric for not driving home. I hope that's not very widespread. I do wonder with the younger generation, Steve, whether they're worried that their escapades are going to end up on their mum's Facebook feed. Is social media an influence?
Well, when we look at a lot of the health campaigns is older people telling young people what they're worried about. So we're worried about health. Whereas the evidence tells us that there are things that concern young people, and reputation is something that's particularly important to young people. And that is a major change that, again, when I was 18, and we're talking about a very long time ago, when I was 18, maybe a few people around me might see if I did something dumb or something risky, whereas now it can end up as a permanent record everywhere. And so I think a lot of people are concerned about the reputational damage. I think the other related to that is that some people, their socializing revolves around their phones as opposed to revolving around a beer. And I think that has had an impact on the way in which people socialize. Obviously, people spending too much time on their mobile devices might be an issue, but it certainly had an impact on the way in which people socialise.
That's interesting. I was wondering for young women too whether safety might be an issue, because we've seen so many horrific stories about what can happen to young women while they're under the influence of alcohol and a perpetrator is nearby.
Yeah, and we need to be careful with that, because it's not an excuse if somebody's intoxicated. Far from it. In fact, quite the opposite, in my view. And sometimes perpetrators are intoxicated as well. Again, it should never be used as an excuse for violent or aggressive or abusive behaviour. It's absolutely not. But certainly, I think people's safety is forefront in their mind. I think the other is, for example, Faye mentioned, we're much more aware about the potential impact of drinking and pregnancy and indeed breastfeeding. So I think that part of that is some people have become much more aware of their health and are looking for alternative ways. They want to socialise. And a point that Faye made is, our lives do revolve around alcohol to a large extent, at least for a lot of us. And I think it's almost like you need an excuse not to drink, whereas perhaps it should be the other way round. And a large part of this increase in products, we've seen an increase in the quality of the non-alcoholic products. We've seen an increase in their acceptability. We've seen an increase in their production and marketing. And this coincidence, I think, has contributed greatly to a market, perhaps, or some of the market, that's ready for a change.
It happened during a pandemic too. Was that a factor?
Well, yes, although it seemed to have gone both ways. On the one hand, as one person put it, the anxiety and the angst and the stress was a perfect opportunity or a perfect nursery for some people to drink more. And there's no doubt that there were significant increases for some people of drinking much more often. And certainly emergency departments saw an increase in some of the severities of cases that arrived. But for some people, we also saw a decrease. Now, part of that might be that people were more sensitive to their own health. And well, they might be, because there is evidence that drinking heavily on single occasions or regularly impairs your ability to resist influenza-type diseases and increases the risk of mortality with those diseases. So not drinking or drinking less was probably a good move. But also some people, I think, if your drinking revolves around being at the nightclub, being at the pub, being at the restaurant, and you're at home and you're not inclined to drink at home, well, it may well be that some people simply reduce their drinking because it wasn't part of how they drank. If you get my sense, that if you like to drink in the pub but not at home, then obviously not being able to go out is going to make a difference to your drinking behaviour.
Well, when we look at the research soup, it will be fascinating to pick out the vegetable bits at some point in the future. Steve Alsop, thanks so much for your time.
You're very welcome. Good morning to you.
Professor Steve Alsop from the National Drug Research Institute at Curtin University. What a fascinating social shift we're living through. You heard earlier from Faye Lawrence too, founder of non-drinking social group Untoxicated. Michael McKenzie, what are people saying to this?
Oh, look, it's been an incredible response since you started this conversation, Hilary. We've had literally dozens of texts. Joe says, I wasn't drinking much, just a few drinks a week, but I found I always got a hangover afterwards. I resented the loss of my time and well-being. My girlfriends were horrified and questioned if I tried all kinds of alcohol to check them all out. I find it easier, says Joe, to drink tonic and lemon with them rather than the water I prefer. And in fact, that sort of peer pressure around drinking sort of permeates a lot of these texts. Someone else says, I gave up 6 months ago at the age of 50 and I'm loving it. I just wanted clarity in this pandemic world. The world has changed. We don't really understand that in Australia because we're in a bubble. But as an immigrant from Ireland, I understand it differently. Vespa says a toxic grog culture has spilled over into work and recreational spaces in too many rural communities where I've lived. Social death for us non-drinkers. It puts women in danger. It's great to think that things might change, but I'm not holding my breath. Someone else says, I've tried to switch to non-alcoholic red wine, but it tastes like Ribena. It's awful. Any recommendations welcome? That's from Richard.
Well, all we can say, Michael, is that the market is big and expanding.
Indeed so. And look, I'll have more from people who are partaking of non-alcoholic drinks later in the show.
Michael McKenzie, thank you. Well, speaking of huge social changes, remember when there was no email? It is quite hard to recall, but some computer scientists say that we should go back to that because it's so bad for us. More on that next.
I'm continuing my quest for true love.
We all dream of finding the one, and it's not always easy.
I haven't been very lucky in love.
But in Love on the Spectrum, our singles are very determined.
I'll do whatever it takes to find a girlfriend.
What's your age limit?
17.
From first dates to happily ever after.
She said yes.
Excellent.
Love on the Spectrum.
Cheers to us.
The new season starts tonight on ABC TV and streaming on iView.
Imagine, if you will, a working life that does not involve email. The things you could achieve, the group emails you wouldn't have to delete, one less tab to open up each day. Cal Newport says emails are just attention-seeking time wasters, and he says they could soon be a thing of the past. He's a professor of computer science at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. and a New York Times best-selling author. His latest book is called A World Without Email. Cal, hi.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
Oh, it's a great pleasure. I'm intrigued by this concept. Let's start with some of the key points. How often does the average worker spend each day checking and writing emails?
Well, different surveys differ, but the number I come back to most often is, roughly speaking, once every 6 minutes.
Okay, that's very frequent and it would obviously take a lot of time. Is that just in office jobs or any job that involves email at some point?
Well, this data came mainly from office jobs. So this was a data set of people who used a tool called Rescue Time that actually monitors your use of many different applications. They gathered data from over 10,000 different users and aggregated it, mainly office workers, and found that once every 6 minute number.
Wow. So what's wrong with email other than obviously we're checking it a lot?
Well, as a tool, it's great. The original reason why email spread so rapidly in the 1990s is it solved real problems. It replaced the fax machine, it replaced voicemail, and it replaced memos. It was unambiguously better than those technologies for the purposes they had been deployed for. The issue was not the tool, but how we started using it. Following in the wake of email spread was a new way of collaborating that I call the hyperactive hive mind, where we began to work out most office collaboration or coordination through unscheduled back and forth digital messages. It's that style of collaboration that overfilled our inbox and forced us to have to check it again and again just to keep up with our normal work.
So can we be sure that we are actually spending more time on emails than we were sending and receiving faxes and chasing people down the corridors and making phone calls before?
Oh, we're spending significantly more time communicating. One story that I really enjoyed that I uncovered while working on this book came from an engineer at IBM who was involved in the 1980s when IBM first turned the switch on email within the internal office communication system in IBM. And they had gone around and carefully measured how much are people communicating right now with memos and notes and voicemails. And they provisioned a mainframe computer that could handle all of that communication via email. And they burned out that computer in 3 days. People began communicating 5 to 6 times more than they ever had before. And it took just a few days of email being present for that switch to happen.
Wow. And now that's happening in our brains.
Yeah, our brains cannot keep up with this need to constantly have to check in on all these conversations. And as I emphasize, it's that checking that kills us. The productivity poison lurking here is the context shifting, having to shift our attention to an inbox and back again. We can't do that quickly. it causes a real issue in our ability to concentrate.
But we think that we're really good at multitasking, don't we? I mean, the number of tabs that people have open at any one time on their computer is mind-blowing.
We think it, but we're terrible at it. And even worse, we think that we're single tasking because we don't keep our inbox open concurrently with what we're doing. But what we don't realize is that those quick checks that we do every 5 to 10 minutes, where we jump over to our email inbox, then back to the thing we're doing, that can leave a lasting impact. 5, 10, 15 minutes of reduced cognitive performance as our brain goes through this convoluted and aborted context shift. So even when we think we're single tasking, if we have to check these channels every 5 to 6 minutes, we are really dull in our ability to think.
And it makes us sad, doesn't it? It has an emotional impact.
Well, we're not wired for there to be a large amount of conversation from people we know that's piling up and that we're not dealing with in the moment. And even though the rational part of our brain says it's okay, this is not life critical communication. This is just emails. We have norms. We don't have to respond for hours. There's a deeper part of our brain that says people need me and I'm not responding. That hits some deep triggers that makes us really anxious and unhappy.
Tell us about some work I think that Gloria Mark did that quantified this effect. Because it makes sense on a logical level, but it's a bit disturbing when you read the research, isn't it?
You can actually hook people up to heart rate monitors. You can also take, like Mark's team did, thermal cameras, put those thermal cameras on people's computer monitors, because you can measure stress by looking at the heat flush that shows up on their cheeks. This is a well-known method for measuring stress. And they could correlate these two different measures of stress with people opening their inbox on their computer. And surprise, surprise, what happens when that inbox opens? Heat flush, heart rate changes, stress is picked up.
Wow. What about the people who are, super organised and they have those auto diversions that shoot things into particular boxes so they can check them later?
This is like you have a hole in your ship. That ship is filling with water, and you're really impressed by how you're organizing the buckets you're using in your quixotic effort to bail it out. The issue here is this underlying workflow that says everything is worked out informally, on the fly, with back and forth messaging. That's fine if you're working with one person on one thing, but in the average office, we get dozens and dozens of these asynchronous back and forth conversations. That demands that we check the inbox all the time because we have to participate in these conversations all the time. There's no way away from that, so long as the underlying rule for how we collaborate is just let's rock and roll in our inbox.
I'm so pleased I never bothered organising my buckets. Just let the ship fill, I think I said to myself. We're speaking with Cal Newport, Professor of Computer Science at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. His latest book is A World Without Email. And when I read the title, I think I just lost focus for a minute and drifted away. Been on a little mental picnic. Cal, tell us how not having email might help us get more work done. I mean, there's obviously the time management issue, but you talk about something called deep work. Tell us about that.
Well, so we're not going to necessarily have email be banished as a tool, but we're going to really banish how we use it. We'll use it like we used to use in my vision, our physical mailboxes. It's a great way to send a contract to someone or to send out an announcement about new parking regulations. But in my vision, most of the back and forth conversation that happens about work will happen in much more structured ways that is bespoke to the specific type of work you're doing. Now, what this is going to enable is when you're working on something, you can just work on that thing. There's not ad hoc, unscheduled conversations you have to keep checking in on. When you can focus without distraction on something important, you can do it at a much higher level of quality, and you can do it much faster than if you're trying to do that in a hyperactive hive mind environment of constant context switch.
Well, and what about things like the group chats and instant messaging things that really took off during the pandemic lockdowns around the world? Are they out as well?
So all those are doing is taking the hyperactive hive mind workflow that email introduced and implementing it even faster. So the argument behind Slack, for example, is if you're going to be collaborating using the hyperactive hive mind, so just back and forth unscheduled messaging, we'll build a better tool for that than an email inbox. And they did. And it's why we both love and hate Slack, that if you're using the hyperactive hive mind, it's a slicker tool, but we hate the hyperactive hive mind because our mind is not meant to go back and forth. So no Slack or Teams. These type of products are not by themselves going to save us because they just actually take the problem and make it prettier, but actually even more exasperated. So
are you saying that we should schedule time? How do people go with that if they have, look, you can only contact me between this hour and this hour? The world doesn't really work that way at the moment, does it?
Yeah, we have to be more nuanced in that. There is unfortunately not a one-size-fits-all solution. We can't replace email with brand new tool X and all of our problem will be solved. What we actually have to do is a little bit more complicated, a little bit more demanding, but we have to actually identify the different processes, the things we do again and again in our work life, and for each, come up with, here's our rules and guidelines and systems for how we collaborate about this process. And that answer is going to look different for different types of work. It's hard to get this right, but when you're specific about figuring out these rules, you can get away from unscheduled messaging, and getting away from unscheduled messaging is the key to sidestepping all these productivity issues.
And so, Cal, are you saying that our work life might involve a lot more phone calls or physically getting up from our desk to go trot round to an internal contact? Or how would things look in this new world?
So again, it's going to depend on the type of work, but for some type of work, for example, we might follow a pattern more similar to what software developers use. We'll have shared task boards that the teams can look at to see who's working on what and what its status is. There might be highly structured, scheduled status meetings where we very quickly check in on who is working on what or what they need. In other cases, we might deploy tools like office hours. If you have short questions for me, there's a set hour every day where I'm always going to be online and always have my proverbial door open, and you can stop by and ask it, but you have to wait till my next office hours to ask it. You can't just shoot it to me in an email. And sometimes it'll just be simple tools. We need to schedule a meeting. Let's use a scheduling tool instead of doing 7 or 8 back and forth messages. So there's a lot of different ways this could look.
I was interested to hear about one example you write about in your book. Sean, he lost 2 employees to burnout and found himself answering emails till 1 a.m. Tell us about the changes that he made.
Well, they switched over to Basecamp as the primary tool they use for organizing their projects. And I should say this was a UX development firm, about 12 people. It was based in London. They shut off Slack completely. They moved email to be like a physical mailbox, something you check at most once a day. The projects lived in Basecamp. They had a morning and an afternoon pre-scheduled check-in time. This was largely a remote company, so people would come in on video conference for this. They very quickly be like, who's working on what? What do you need? What happened to the thing you're working on yesterday? And then they would just work until the next check-in. They were worried about this, but it ended up functioning beautifully, and they got their sanity back.
And in terms of their contact with their clients, how did that work?
So they had changed this pretty drastically, and this was a big point of concern for them. They thought they were going to lose clients, but they had clients before that were using their company's Slack channel. They could bother them at any moment on Slack, and their new system was, no, we have a once-a-week phone call. At the end of that phone call, we will put down in writing everything we said and everything we committed to, and we will send that to you right away so you can hold us accountable. We're not talking again until next week. They made their clients actually sign a client communication agreement that said, this is how we're going to talk. They didn't lose clients. The clients were actually happy to have the clarity.
So you get basically one giant email a week, but not all the little fiddly ones.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we're trying to avoid is lots of unscheduled back and forth messages. Once a week scheduled message is so far superior.
And Cal, I mean, you write yourself that we are a social species. Our instinct to connect, you write, is accompanied by an anxious unease when we neglect these interactions. Would we miss email if we didn't have those little pings popping into the inbox all the time?
I think there's much more healthy ways to actually satisfy our human need for connection. And it's one of the things I've actually been saying during the pandemic is let's not mix 2 things together. Let's not mix together the very real need for human interaction within a workplace with what's the best way to actually collaborate. We shouldn't keep around a substandard method of collaboration like the hyperactive hive mind because it has a side effect of giving us a way to keep in touch with people. Let's find other ways to really keep in touch with people that do that really well. And when it comes to organizing our work, say what's the best way to organize our work.
And Cal Newport, just finally, I have to ask, because it is ironic that most of the organising for this interview happened between the publicist and the producer over email. How well are you going with implementing these new ways of doing things in your life?
Well, one thing I'll say is when I was booking my publicity tour for this book in the U.S., me and my publicist put together a really nice system that did not involve email, but instead involved a shared document where she could put in the different interviews, and I would check this once a day and put in my times, and she would then put in the information I needed. And we scheduled dozens and dozens of interviews with basically 0 emails between us. And so it was kind of a nice experiment of the ideas in action.
And looking further ahead, do we need a right to disconnect like they've been working on in France? Would that help us?
It's an interesting idea, but what is unique, I think, about this situation is that almost all of the stakeholders are aligned. Employees don't like the hyperactive hive mind, but managers don't like it either, and business owners don't like it. It makes people miserable, it gets high turnover, and it's not very productive. So I don't think we need law to get us past the hyperactive hive mind. I think we just need enough energy to get past the complexities of doing so, because once we do, it'll be so profitable and so good for the workers that everyone will be quick to embrace it.
Well, it does sound ideal and idyllic. I can't wait to see how it's rolled out. Cal Newport, thank you so much for explaining it to us today.
Oh, it was my pleasure.
Cal Newport's a professor of computer science at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. The book outlining this brave new world of no email is called A World Without Email. You're listening to Life Matters, and in a moment, Stephen Oliver is fabulous. He's going to tell Michael McKenzie all about his upcoming cabaret and being a writer, actor, comedian, poet, singer. Lucky us. You're listening to Radio National.
This is Life Matters, and our next guest is Stephen Oliver. Stephen was a poet and a playwright before he became famous as an actor in the ABC's hit sketch show called Black Comedy. As a young man, Stephen wrote songs about becoming famous when he grew up, but when fame arrived, I'm not actually sure it was exactly what Stephen imagined. We'll talk to him about that. Stephen's talents have led to write works for the stage and the screen. His poetry is acclaimed. It's been published both locally and internationally. He's even appeared in one of the Marvel movies. And tomorrow night sees Stephen open at the Sydney Opera House with his brand new creation. It's a cabaret called Bigger and Blacker. And it's my great honour to say, Stephen Oliver, welcome to Life Matters.
Honour. Well, thank you for having me.
Oh, it's our pleasure.
Stephen, if it's an honour, you've got to raise your standards.
No. We try and keep things pretty low so that when people like you come on, it's actually fantastic for us. Now, Stephen, you're no stranger to the Opera House. You've been there a few times. What are some of the other reasons you've appeared on stage there?
Oh, okay. Well, let's see. The first time was for the Deadly Awards, where I was a hip-hop dancer and I did a tap dance solo. The second time was for the National Poetry Finals. The third time was to host a ballroom event that was happening there, and the fourth time was for a project that Maeve Marsden runs called Queer Stories, where I shared a story about my mother. Oh. So this time it'll be my cabaret show.
Which is the first time you've brought this kind of art form to the stage. I mean, you practically live at the Opera House. So, you know, it's
well,
it's
I call
great
myself a black of all trades.
Now, well, what's really interesting about this show, along with many other parts of your output, but this show particularly, the cabaret, Bigger and Blacker, is that you're actually drawing on stories and songs and music that you've created from as far back as your childhood.
Yeah. Oh, but I don't know. Oh, as far back as my child.
Well, teenage years, maybe?
19, maybe. Yeah. So the songs that are in the show were like songs that, I'd written. There were other songs for a musical I've been writing forever, or the songs like that I was writing for other people, for stuff they were going through. But then there's also songs like after Black Comedy happened and stuff, and just stuff that I've gone through personally. But the interesting thing is that I found that some of the songs, because I've written them so long ago, I was writing them as either imagined, kind of situations or experiences that other people had gone through. But since writing them, I've gone through them myself. So these songs have turned into lived experience. And
Can you
that's how I've been.
Give me an example of what you mean by that?
Okay, well, say, for example, I mean, this song isn't in the show, unfortunately, but I did write a song, like, when I left Townsville to go to Perth, I'd found, like, some people who I'd loved and adored and, grown up with all my life suddenly were kind of saying things about me and that, that I was trying to be something else or, it was that kind of stuff. And so I wrote a song called Mr. Popularity. But it went, oh God, I'm not warmed up, so please don't judge my singing.
No, I love the fact you want to sing us something. That'd be great.
I will sing. I will try to sing you something in my unwarmed up state. But it goes, some people say I'm nothing, but I know I'm something more. They criticize and comment, but I just choose to ignore. For I know there'll be a day when they'll see my name in lights. And then they'll all come running when I am shining bright, as I go on to be as famous can be. See my face upon a billboard and cry out, that's me. No more emptiness for me. Once I'm a celebrity, Mr. Popularity, just to wait and see. Oh, well, thank you.
But there's so much in that.
Well, there is, but it's funny, and and that's what I love about songwriting, is that it's a snapshot of your life, and it shows you the way you were thinking or how you thought. Like, I thought celebrity would fix everything, and which is what a lot of people think. I found, after becoming a celebrity, is everybody thinks my problems were kind of solved and stuff like that after Black Comedy had come out, and that I was now famous, and it's fascinating for me to go back and to see that, and to see that I even thought the same way about celebrity and what I thought it would do for me.
And when you wrote that Mr. Popularity, how old were you at that stage?
I was 19 then.
That was then. Okay.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
When you reflect on how you thought and felt about yourself as a young man writing that song and how you now feel, is there a great disparity in self-perception between those two ages?
Yes and no. Well, I mean, it's kind of like, it's interesting the way that I looked at celebrity, but it shows that I had a confidence in myself. That I kind of, and I carried that through all my life. Like, I was never someone, well, like, because I have a lot of friends who made it in the industry as well. I made it, well before I did. And I was never kind of someone who was kind of jealous and going, why aren't I making it? Or why not? You know what I mean? Like, I never doubted myself in the sense that I never had the goods. But then at the same time, it's kind of, I think I suffer a bit from the imposter syndrome as well.
But isn't that what drives creative people forward, is that they have to prove to themselves and to the rest of the world that they are not a sham?
I think so. And I think that, I mean, it's like, will I ever truly be happy? That I kind of asked myself. And whereas I thought, that celebrity would bring happiness, I thought that, but in a lot of ways, I think celebrity brought emptiness, I think, in a lot of ways. But, but there's the flip side to that as well. Like, celebrity has given me so much happiness in the sense of interactions I've had with strangers on the street. And people, saying things to me like, oh, you make me feel proud, or you make me feel good about myself, or, so there's been that beautiful, beautiful interaction as well that I've had with people. But I had a very hard time after the first season of doing the season at the Watt here, because, it got rave reviews and I was getting standing ovations and sold out shows and all this kind of stuff. And it was beautiful that I was getting that for sharing my story, that people were responding to my story in that way. But then at the same time, it was kind of me going home to my one-bedroom unit and not having anyone to share my day with. So, you know what I mean? Like, it kind of highlighted other things that I didn't have in my life as well.
But did you find, because you're so multi-skilled, what did you say, you're a black of all trades?
A black of all trades, yes.
Yes. I mean, the fact that you can also speak about your truth in a range of ways. For example, your acclaimed poetry. I just watched one of your performances prior to us chatting, actually, and, there is great depth and pathos and truth in the way you put words together. Does that actually help prop up those times of emptiness in your one-bedroom flat, because you're putting out other forms of art that also speak truly to you and therefore fulfill you in a way that perhaps fame doesn't always do?
Yeah, well, that was the thing. Like, with my poetry, I wanted to push that out there after Black Comedy happened, because I saw how I was becoming this idea to people, and that people were wanting me to be this one thing all the time.
Yeah.
And when people kind of do that to you constantly, and it kind of makes you feel like that's the one thing you have to offer the world, or that's people just want you, it was kind of like, the song Dance Monkey. It was very much that. Like, it was, do this for, like, I'd be at funerals and people would be going, okay, make us laugh. And I'm kind of like, well, I'm grieving for my family member too. So, I saw the way that was happening. So with my poetry, I wanted to push that out there to kind of go, well, look, I am an idiot. And yes, I do, act stupid and stuff like that. But I also sit around and I think deeply about things and how I'm affected, not just me, but also my people, which is really what I'm writing the majority of my stuff about. It's like my people are going through all this kind of stuff. And you know, and even then, sometimes it can be, I've realized that people can take your words and turn them into what they want them to be rather than what you're, you know, no matter how articulate you want to be, how much you want to be in depth by something. A lot of people, you know, won't listen to something to hear what you're saying. They will hear it to respond to it. And, you know, if there's one thing I've learned, like now a lot of people, you know, one of the first things I've noticed about racist behaviour with people who don't think they're racist is that they will ask your opinion on something. And they're not asking your opinion because they want to hear what you think about it. They will ask you your opinion because they want to tell you what they think about it.
Yeah. So they can rail against your opinion.
Yeah, exactly. So they're not, you know, they're not really listening. Like I remember writing a poem called Real, and it's all about identity, me growing up as an Aboriginal person, and people always saying to me, "Oh, you're not even a full blood," and all that kind of crap, you know. And I'm like, yeah, well, I know that. You're not pointing out anything new, you idiot. But, you know, I didn't grow up with anything about my great-grandfather who was Chinese. I didn't learn anything about Chinese heritage, you know, or my Indonesian great-grandfather. I didn't learn any of that. I've always grown up knowing my Aboriginal values and identity. That's what, you know, I've always been told. And even, like, it's like I would get called black all the time. Oh, you black, you black. I never got called you Chinese. I never got called... You know, my great-great-grandmother who was English, I never got called, oh, you white. I always got called black. I've always been called black. Whether it was from, you know, my family who, you know, because we got told we were black, so Aboriginal people started calling each other black. That's why we refer to each other as black, because we were, you know, like with the N-word, that's what happened with African Americans. Because they were constantly called the N-word all the time, they started calling each other the N-word. And so that's what happens with, you know, with us saying black, because we were told we were black. All the time, we started calling each other black. And so then people, you know, you refer to yourself as black and people go, oh, you're not even a full blood. And it's like, well, hold up, you're calling me black all the time. And then it's always other people deciding your identity for you. So I wrote a poem in response to that. And, you know, it's a 4-minute poem. And I go into great detail about it because I always try to put the shoe on the other foot to show other people. And, you know, so people go, oh, yeah, I get it now. Okay. But even sometimes when you can spend that much time, like people will still find a way. Like, and I remember one of the comments where people going, oh, his last name's Oliver. And I'll say he's probably, you know, European, descent, all this kind of stuff. And it's like, no, Oliver was just given to my great-great-grandfather when he was stolen from the mission. When he was stolen from the Daintree and taken to a mission. They just gave him the English name of Oliver because they didn't want to actually say, they couldn't pronounce his Aboriginal or spell his Aboriginal name. So they decided to call him Oliver. So I've still got people telling me how to identify and saying, oh, that's where his name comes from. It's like, no, my name doesn't come from that. My name comes from a police officer who decided to slap that name on my great-great-grandfather. And that's why I have the surname Oliver.
So, Stephen, in the cabaret that we are going to see tomorrow night at the Opera House, and I know you've performed it elsewhere as well, are you trying to sort of uncover the multidimensionality of any person, but certainly someone within the creative arts, such as yourself, who was born and raised in Cloncurry, went to Townsville, ended up in Perth, and now lives in Brisbane? And, you know, in that long journey I've just summarised very quickly in one sentence, there's a multidimensionality of person there that I take it you're going to release via story and song in the cabaret.
Well, I try to. I kind of squeeze everything, you know, from out of practice tap dancing to bad guitar playing. I squeeze in there. But, you know, but the thing is too, and that's what I've always found with, you know, I often find that when people talk about brand or what's your brand or you gotta be this, you gotta be that, and I've always found that a disservice to us as human beings, because human beings, we aren't one thing. We aren't, you know, we might be known for one thing, but that doesn't mean we are one thing. We are so, you know, multifaceted. You know, we are so complex. You know, the dichotomy of being human. We try to simplify it, and I find we do that with anything in the way, you know, we have this kind of thinking of where we go, we have to label things and we have to put it give it a name so we understand it. And like, you know, sexuality is the perfect thing where we go, oh, you're gay, I can understand you. Oh, if I call you bi, I can understand you. If I call you straight, I can understand you. Oh, wait up, you're a straight guy, you slept with a gay guy. Oh, wait, no, what is that? I'm confused. What does that mean? So we you know, we try to do this kind of thing of where we label people all the time. Yeah. And we want people to be this one thing so we can simplify it for us to understand. And it's like, but we're not simple. And why do we do that thing of trying to you know, it's almost like trying to dumb ourselves down in a way to understanding each other and understanding the complexity of being human, you know, and whether that has to do with race or culture or sexuality or whatever. And it's like, you know, I don't understand why we do that to ourselves. So it's kind of, you know, and that's why, you know, even the joke of being a black of all trades, but it's also kind of making a statement of going like, I don't want to be labeled just as one thing. I don't want to be seen as just one thing, and then people thinking that's all I had to offer the world. When it's like, well, no, I had a lot more I wanted to give, and I've been fortunate that people have embraced that.
And they can have another chance to see you in all your multifaceted glory on stage at the Opera House. Maybe as a way to finish off and as a way of sort of flagging some of the other content in your cabaret called Bigger and Blacker, do you have another little excerpt of song you'd like to sing out of rehearsal?
Another little excerpt of song? Oh, you're putting me on the spot. You know what? Do you want me to give it a try? I will give it a try.
Go on then.
So this song I wrote, it's about a lot of things. It's about materialism. It's about chasing emptiness. It's about what we just really need in life.
Here's Stephen Oliver.
I don't need someone to get me a present. I don't need to get a flashy new gift. I don't need inspirational quotes if you're thinking I need to get my spirit to lift. I get me tickets to some far destination, though I need to get a getaway. The only thing to get that really does matter is getting me and all the silly things that I say. Just get me. Just get me. Don't let me think I'm not good enough to be understood. Do you get me? Just get me. Don't let me think I'll never find the kind of heart that could. Is that good enough?
It's always good enough. Stephen Oliver, it's been an absolute delight to hear you taking risks with us as you do every night on stage, and in your written word, and in your performances, and in your comedy, and in your poetry. Thank you so much for spending some time with us here on Life Matters. All the best with tomorrow night at the Opera House.
Thank you very much. Are you getting along to see it? Are you in Sydney?
No, I'm in my bedroom in Melbourne.
Oh, well, we're in talks with Melbourne, so hopefully we'll get down there and you'll get to see it down there one night.
Oh, that'd be great. Stephen, thanks so much.
No worries, Eddie. Bye-bye.
This is Radio National. And while I was talking to Stephen there, Hill, more comments coming in about choosing a non-alcoholic approach to consumption. And David from Canberra wrote in, amongst many, many other people, and says, Hillary, I'm in my mid-60s. I gave up alcohol 30 years ago. I tried the available non-alcoholic beer at the time, and it was awful. I recently tried some of the new drinks, and the variety and the quality available is great. I now can enjoy a cold beer again.
Yeah, an entire gin shop has opened up in Melbourne of non-alcoholic gin.
Really? I didn't know that.
I know.
What, just dedicated to that one spirit?
It's very Melbourne. Yeah, it's probably the size of a shoebox.
That's right, and painted black. Daniel says, I have cystic fibrosis and always struggled to find an excuse to not drink. 14 months sober now thanks to the pandemic, which I think is intriguing because a lot of people remarked anecdotally that their drinking went up during pandemic, but not for Daniel. And Daniel does say Australia has a toxic drinking culture that needs to be talked about. And Daniel, thanks for writing to us. Someone else mentions here, used to drink every day and believed I did have a problem. I've had no alcohol since the end of December 2020. I've lost 15 kilos. I feel fantastic. There's no brain fog, no headaches or tiredness, and I feel healthy. Someone else says, about 10 years ago, I developed an intolerance for alcohol. Even a sip resulted in a terrible headache the following day and was totally incapacitating for the whole day. I looked for non-alcoholic alternatives so I could at least feel what I drank was a bit special, not just water. And as people are remarking here, and as you discussed today, there are options now on the market that means that you can feel like you're drinking something worthwhile that is non-alcoholic.
Yeah, it's a complicated set of emotions and judgments around it too. Michael, thank you.
Thank you.
Michael's a treasure, but not yet an official one. On our next program, you'll meet a registered Australian living treasure who's friends with His Holiness the Dalai Lama. I'm talking about Reverend Bill Cruz. Bill began working with Sydney's most needy in King's Cross in the early 1970s at the Wayside Chapel. And he went on to become a reverend himself and serve his own congregation in Ashfield in Sydney's inner west, again focusing on people who others didn't seem to care about. You'll hear some of the stories of those people and those times from Bill Cruz's memoir, 12 Rules for Living a Better Life. That's on Life Matters next time on Radio National.
You've been listening to an ABC podcast. Discover more great ABC podcasts, live radio and exclusives on the ABC Listen app.